Inshallah, we have Sister Linsay Taylor today with us on a very important presentation. The topic of today's presentation is Islamophobia and ways and means to tackle it. And also, she will also cover the reason for Islamophobia and certain other aspects about it. Sister Linsay is a chapter in charge of MEND in Edinburgh, or is it Scotland? Yeah, Scotland. Yeah, for Scotland. And she's also with MCS, Muslim Council of Scotland. And she participates. She's also on the Interfaith group as well for Edinburgh City, I guess. So she is a lawyer by qualifications in Scots law and human rights law in her master's. She did human rights law, and inshallah, with all her experience, will be, delighted to hear her on the very important subject of Islamophobia, which some of us do realize is a big issue, and some of us still do not realize that this is a growing menace or threat for the community. So the bottom line is to realize that this problem exists, and there is a desperate need to do something to tackle it. We have seen in the past that these sort of hate rhetoric and propagation of hate, for whatever reason, could eventually become very disastrous for some of the communities. So I think it's very important for us to keep a tab on it and understand it first, and then tackle it. So without further ado, I'll let Sister Linsay to go ahead and start her presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for having me here. And just kind of one little thing I'd like to clarify. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not practicing, but my background, my degree and masters are in Scots law. But yes, so I'm Linsay Taylor. I am the regional manager for MEND here in Scotland. MEND is an organisation that works to promote and encourage the engagement of Muslim communities within politics and media. And part of the way that we do that is to tackle Islamophobia across all areas of the UK and addressing all different types of Islamophobia. So today we're going to do a presentation, Causes and Cures of Islamophobia, and I'm just going to share some slides with you now, which we will look at as we go through the presentation. So, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islamophobia Causes and Cures. So we'll go through it in three different steps. So first, the definition and proof, then playing our part, and then successful change. And a lot of it is about playing our part. What can we as a Muslim community do to tackle Islamophobia, but also what can the wider community do? But first, we're going to look at definition and proof. So here we have the definition of Islamophobia, which is from the Centre of American Progress. This is not the one that MEND champion themselves, but we highlight it because actually it's a very good definition. It really highlights clearly what Islamophobia is. So here it says Islamophobia is an exaggerated, irrational fear, hatred and hostility towards Muslims and Islam, perpetrated by negative stereotypes resulting in bias, discrimination and marginalisation of Muslims from civic, social and political life. So here it shows us who it is, what it is, and what is happening through the Islamophobia. So that's really important to bear that in mind as we go through the presentation. Now, what we will see here is a definition that MEND actually support, but with guidance notes, because we don't feel that it goes quite far. This is the definition from the APPG on British Muslims, from the UK Parliament, and that's Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness and perceived Muslimness. Now, most political parties have adopted this definition here in Scotland and in the rest of the UK, apart from the Conservatives down in England. And some of the parties in Scotland, although they have said that they will adopt it, it's not yet inside their policies. Now, many people think that Islamophobia should actually not be a term, and instead it should be anti-Muslim. Really important. Anti-Muslim hatred is about tackling hate crimes, the verbal, the physical. It's about the hate crimes that we see in the street, whereas Islamophobia goes a lot further. Islamophobia is about the discrimination that we face in our day-to-day lives, the marginalisation, the exclusion from everyday lives, including work, media, politics, and all different areas of civic society. And so that's why it's really important that we tackle it as Islamophobia, that we have a definition, and that we move forward in that way. So the chain of Islamophobia. So we say the chain of Islamophobia because it can happen in a very circular motion. It can happen one connecting onto the next, until we end up, and we'll see where we end up, in very brutal attacks and sometimes murder. So Islamophobia can often start from media negativity. It can often be portrayed in media having headlines like this: 1 in 5 Brits sympathise. 1 in 5 British Muslims sympathise with jihad. Now, that was seen to be untrue, that headline. But what it also shows us is that these headlines are out there. These headlines are being seen and they're being interpreted by the wider community. But also, for every one neutral headline about Muslims, there are 21 negative or extremist headlines about Muslims. Now, a lot of people may think, well, they're only headlines and, we can do other things to counter it. But actually, for every single one, I think about this, every single one, marginal or slightly positive headline about a Muslim, there are 21 extremist or negative references about Muslims. Now, if we were all in a room together, and unfortunately due to coronavirus we're not in these days, but if we were all in a room together and one person walked in and said, oh, this person's okay, but then 21 people followed them and said negative things about this person, over time you would start to think, oh, maybe there is something here, maybe there is a reason why there's such and such happening, maybe there's more to it. But actually, as we know, because we're part of the Muslim community, we know that actually these headlines mainly have absolutely no grounding, and it is just simply negativity towards Muslims, and it's something that we need to counter. The next, we see vandalism, things like grave attacks on graves, desecration of headstones and other things like this. Now, a lot of people, again, they think, oh, it's just mindless vandalism. How would you feel if this was one of your family members? How would you feel if you went to visit a deceased family member and this is what you came across? But also, these mindless acts of vandalism can lead on to bigger acts of vandalism, such as the mosque attacks here. So there's vandalism, but also many of our mosques here in Scotland have been attacked with arson attacks, which we'll see as we go through the presentation, and also in other ways as well. I know that through in Edinburgh, at one point there was pigs' heads being left on mosque doors and other things like this, which is not only very difficult to deal with and very unsettling, but can lead on to further and scarier attacks. So we have here verbal abuse and bullying. Verbal abuse and bullying, what do we mean by that? We mean bullying in schoolyards, and unfortunately, as we'll see going through the presentation, it is often children who are targeted by Islamophobia. Also, what we will find is the verbal abuse that we get out in the street, attacks on our Muslim community, but especially attacks on our sisters who are alone and vulnerable and very visual Muslims when they're out and about in the streets, often more so than our brothers. And these can lead on to the physical attacks and murders. Now, many people will say, oh, Islamophobia is not that bad in the UK, there haven't been, or in Scotland, there haven't been any physical attacks, there haven't been any murders, but unfortunately myself personally, I know of people who have been physically attacked simply because of Islamophobia. So it's a perpetuating chain that can happen due to Islamophobia, and it happens every single day here in Scotland. These are some of the headlines that we were talking about earlier, and we can see a whole host of them here on this page. Now, if you look at this page, what's jumping out on for you? For me, what's jumping out is that a lot of them are very misleading. A lot of them are exceptionally untrue, but it's a perpetual barrage of negativity about Muslims. Muslims plot to kill Pope. Muslims, 1 in 5 Muslims sympathise with jihad. Muslim school ban our culture. So on, and it's talking very negatively about Muslims and Muslims within the UK society, which is something that we really need to counteract. Many people think that it's just the rags, the tabloids that are bringing out these kind of stories, but actually some of our broadsheets are also having very negative effects on our community and very negative stories that they're bringing to the fold as well. So here we have the Times. I know that it's very small and not very difficult, not very easy to see in this setting, but we have here, so Christian child forced into Muslim foster care. As we read through that article, it talks about how the foster carer didn't speak any English, and it also talks about how a necklace, which was a piece of jewellery, a cross that the young girl wore, was removed from the girl by the foster carer. Now, actually, when the story is looked into deeper, we find that, well, one, foster carers in the UK, you're not permitted to be a foster carer unless you can speak English. So that was blatantly untrue within the article. But also, the piece of jewellery that was moved from the young girl was actually a family heirloom, and it was removed from her with her consent by the foster carer in order to make sure that the piece of jewellery, the cross, was kept safe for her for future. But the papers obviously portrayed it in a really negative and a really biased way, which showed Muslims in a really negative light. And these are some of the things that we need to work hard to overcome. But it's not just print media. We're also up against social media with, obviously, we've got the lovely Katie Hopkins up here in the corner. I'm not going to read out her comments. You can all read it for yourselves on the screen. But these are the kind of things that we're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And what it tells us here is that between March 2016, some of these slides are slightly outdated, obviously from a few years before, but quite often our research is coming through kind of gradually in this way. So that's why some of them, the figures on them are from previous years. So between March 2016 and 17, 143,920 tweets were sent from the UK that were considered to be anti-Islamic. That's 393 tweets per day. Just think about that for 1 second. What does that mean to you? 393 tweets per day that were negative towards Muslims. I mean, that is just absolutely overwhelming. And this is what we're seeing again, Islamophobia coming through in these ways. And quite often it is, especially during lockdown, especially when people are confined to their homes. And I think actually when we do get the figures from over the last year or so with lockdown, I think we find that this will definitely be up, being that we have a lot of keyboard warriors. And what we have found is that Islamophobia has gone from the street to the home, unfortunately, in a lot of cases. We have the Islamophobia response unit, which we'll talk about slightly further on in our slides, within MEND. And the Islamophobia response unit are finding that quite often, instead of the street Islamophobia or the workplace Islamophobia that they were dealing with before, they're now dealing with home base, with neighbours having Islamophobic attacks on their neighbours, which is obviously very disturbing and upsetting, because it's really important that we feel safe in all places in the society and community, but especially within our own homes. So how is Islamophobia being tackled at a political level? Now this legislation, the Race and Religious Hatred Act 2006, now this is an English and Welsh-based piece of legislation, but obviously we have the hate crime bill going through the Scottish Parliament right now. And unfortunately, the bill is looking slightly similar to the Race Religious Hatred Act that they have south of the border. So race, we can see here, is protected from insult, abuse, violence, threat, intention to stir up racial and religious hate. So it's covered at all of these, as it should be. And that's really important, that it is covered at all of these levels. But we can see that religion is only covered with an intention to stir up religious hatred. Since the Act was brought in 2006, there have only been, to my knowledge, 3 prosecutions under this Act for religious hate crimes, showing you that the Act is not able to do what it's supposed to, and that is protect people from religious hate crime. So what do we mean by intention to stir up religious hate? Well, when we go to the next slide, we can see here, we have Eric Kipson, who was a former UKIP councillor, and he put this very disturbing picture up on his social media. So I don't know if you can all see the picture quite well enough. It is a pig wearing a hat with a chef's hat with Allah on it, and then roasting what is perceived to be a Muslim, and the fire below it is the burning Quran. His comment was, hang them all first and ask questions later. Now, Mr. Kipson was taken to court over this, but actually he was found not guilty because he said there was no intention, and his defence was there was no intention for him to stir up hate. So it shows us that the need to protect and the want to protect is not there within that legislation. And what we can see is that this has been perpetuated within other legislations, and it's really important that legislation is there to protect us in the way that it should. So it's not just the media who are failing the Muslim community, it's also politicians and legislation which is failing the Muslim community as well. But again, it's not just the media and politics, but it is also the media and politics who are failing. But it's also in the job market as well. Now, again, the job market is influenced by media, it's also influenced by politics, and it's overseen by politics as well. But many people believe that hate crime is what happens in the street. It's when the man shouts at the woman wearing the hijab in the street, shouting that she should go home, or shouting that she's a terrorist, or shouting other slurs and racial and religious comments towards her. Many people think that this is what Islamophobia is, and this is all that Islamophobia is. But actually, Islamophobia is so much more than this. Islamophobia is that you are 3 times less likely to get a job or to get called for an interview because you have a Muslim sounding name. And that's why men are calling for name-blind applications. And especially as a woman, a female Muslim, you are not just dealing with the religious connotations, you're often also dealing with the racial connotations, and then as well you're also dealing with the gender connotations, with women from Muslim heritage more likely to be asked about their family setup and interview than a non-Muslim woman. And this is really important that we're tackling Islamophobia at all levels and in all places. Children as well, unfortunately, are often faced with Islamophobia as well. We have here the NSPCC reported that some children, including Muslim children, had experienced bullying so cruelly that they were self-harming. Now, I don't know if many of you know what self-harming is, but this is when people intentionally cause harm to themselves, quite often cutting themselves with knives or razor blades and such things. And that what we have found is that children are self-harming because of the bullying that they're experiencing because of Islamophobia. This we can see again was reported in The Guardian as well about the level of Islamophobia and race hate crimes towards children. Again, we're having Childline recording an increase in bullying, with many of the comments being bomber and terrorist, and we know that that is directed towards Muslim children, unfortunately. So we can see here the level of different attacks of Islamophobia and different ways that Islamophobia can affect us, or different ways that Islamophobia can definitely focus towards the Muslim community. Here we see that, now this again is based in England and Wales, that 8,336 religiously motivated hate crime incidents were recorded in England and Wales in 2017 and 18. 52% of these attacks were against Muslims. Now, that means that over half of all religiously motivated crimes are towards Muslims. And this is showing you just some of the crimes and what we're talking about. So we've got the attacks on mosques, we've got the headlines that are very negative. We also have vandalism occurring in different places. But we also have here, if you can look over to what should be the left of your screen, the burning building. That was an arson attack in Glasgow on a Muslim charity, and it was directed towards them because they were a Muslim charity. We also see graffiti on mosques, and then we also see individuals who have carried out attacks on Muslim individuals as well. Here in the middle of the screen, you have the brother who was murdered simply for being Muslim, and his perpetrator, and many people don't realise this, but his perpetrator had actually arranged to set off bombs in 3 different mosques in the Birmingham area. We also have the man here on the right-hand side of the screen, looking straight into your camera. The man there set out to murder a Muslim, and he drove around the centre of the city. This was down in England. He drove around the centre of the city looking for a Muslim person to attack, and he drove into, he first tried to drive into some schoolgirls, but fortunately missed them, but then he drove into Sister Zainab Hussein, who was left critical, and he drove over her, and then he drove away. And he actually drove back to the scene, again trying to drive over other people at the time, but he drove back to the scene and seen that she wasn't actually dead, and then so drove over her again. Fortunately, alhamdulillah, the sister did not die, but she took a lot of time to recover. It took many years and a very long time in hospital for her to recover, and she still has a lot of issues relating to that awful attack, but MEND were able to step in and support and help her get the justice that she deserves. But you can see here that it's not just the Islamophobic shouting on the street and different things like that. Islamophobia is serious in the UK and has resulted in murder, attempted murder, and very serious physical attacks. Islamophobic hate crime is definitely on the rise. We can see here, year on year, it is definitely increasing across the whole of the UK, which means it's definitely something that we need to be tackling and that our politicians need to be taking very seriously. Now, many people think that Islamophobia is just based in England and that here in Scotland, actually, we don't have that much of an issue, but unfortunately, we really do. And that was highlighted by the CPG that was set up in the Scottish Parliament on tackling Islamophobia. And they did a public inquiry, the first into Islamophobia of its kind, and they did that with Newcastle University, and MEND were very grateful to be able to feed into that. But it found some very worrying statistics. It found that many, especially women, reported that they were unable to feel safe outside of their own home. It found that many had changed the way that they interacted in their everyday life due to Islamophobia. Here we have Anna Sarwar, MSP, who set up the working group. It also found that 83.4% of Scottish Muslims reported saying that they had experienced Islamophobia. So that's 83.4 of every 100 Muslims in Scotland, and there's over 80,000 of us, reported that they had experienced Islamophobia. It found that 93.9% linked Islamophobia to the press. They also linked it to online and social media as well. And this is very worrying, but understandable. Now here we have what happens when Islamophobia unfortunately goes unchecked, and that is the Christchurch killings, where 51 innocent people were murdered due to Islamophobia. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old young boy who was murdered for simply being in the mosque. And this is why it's so important that we tackle Islamophobia at all levels across the UK, making sure that our politicians and our media are well aware of what people are facing in their day-to-day life simply for being Muslim. So, Islamophobia, is it a real problem? I think from what we've seen, we can definitely say that yes, it is a real problem in our society, and 58% within a survey agreed on that. The same survey showed us that people were concerned if a mosque was built in their area, with 43% agreeing that they would be concerned if a mosque was built in their area. And we can see that how that was split into the youth and the older generations. Now, people in the UK have a perception that there are a lot more Muslims than there actually are in the UK. And a survey was shown that this was the level of Muslims that people thought were based in the UK. Let's skip too quick. So 38%, some believe, 20%, over 20% of people believe that 38% of Scotland is actually Muslim. Now we can see from our next graph, that actually only 1.5% of Scotland is Muslim. Now, why do people believe that there is such a large population of Muslims in Scotland when actually it's only 1.5? Now, a lot of that is down to the media perception and showing of Muslims across the whole of Scotland. A lot of it is down to showing the very negative attributes of Muslims or showing Muslims in a very negative way, and it makes people believe that there are a lot more Muslims than actually is. And this is something that we really do need to overcome. So what do we do if ourselves or somebody that we know is suffering from Islamophobia and is attacked with Islamophobia, either as a hate crime or as a discrimination? So we have the Islamophobia response unit here in MEND. Now, MEND works across lots of different areas in the UK in lots of different ways. So we're based across the whole of the UK, but part of our work is to support the victims of Islamophobia. So part of our work is about tackling Islamophobia in the community by having community groups that we have across Scotland in Edinburgh, Falkirk and Glasgow, but it's also about supporting victims. Here are some of the statistics and numbers of the cases that we have worked with within the Islamophobia response unit. We can see that we have worked with 336 hate crimes, 212 cases of discrimination, and 33 cases were unstated. They didn't fall within our remit. The next slide will show you slightly higher numbers because it's slightly newer slide. But what we have found is that a popular trend is that women tend to be more the victim of Islamophobia than men, and a lot of that is to do with the visualisation of women that you can see in the niqab, hijab, when they're out in the street. Islamophobia, when it is hate crime in the street, tends to be perpetuated by men, usually white, 40s to 60s, and it is perpetrated against women in the street. Now, it says here that our youngest victim of Islamophobia is a 5-year-old girl, but unfortunately, since this slide was created, we now have our youngest victim of Islamophobia that the Islamophobia response unit are supporting is a 4-year-old boy who has suffered from Islamophobic bullying in his school, which is absolutely devastating. Many people think that it is just adults who suffer from Islamophobia, but unfortunately, anyone at any age can suffer from Islamophobia, and it is really important that we protect our children. So what do MEND do to try and overcome Islamophobia? They work obviously to reduce it throughout the whole of the UK. They do that by engaging with media and politics, and one of the ways that we do that with politics is to engage, especially coming up to an election as we are, to really engage with the hustings process and other processes as well. We're looking to secure Muslim futures for our children in Britain. As I've said, our youngest victim is a 4-year-old boy, so it's really important that we're tackling Islamophobia so that the next generation are not growing up with Islamophobia to the level that we are and in the way that we are. We also look to highlight the general contribution of Muslims across the whole of the UK. So how do we tackle Islamophobia? There are lots of different ways to tackle Islamophobia. There's engaging with legislation and our politicians, and this is really important to engage with our politicians. The Muslim voice has to be heard within our communities, but also within the political sphere and in civic society. Now, I know that for many, we were focusing on making sure that we were able to have halal meat and that we were building mosques, and we were making sure that our communities were here in the UK and that we were building our communities here in the UK. But it's now time that we look further. We look at the political sphere and we look at how we can engage and how we can make sure that Muslims are heard within the community. In doing that, we'll tackle a lot of different issues that are facing Muslims, such as employment discrimination, with legislation coming out that would support the Muslim community. Also, it would help to counteract, hopefully prevent, and Schedule 7 and counter-terrorism legislation. The other reason that it's really important to engage with politics is we've seen just across the water in Europe, the CAB bans happening, the right to halal meat bans happening, and so forth across many European cities. And it's really important that we are engaging with the political sphere here in the UK to ensure that that doesn't happen. It's really important we ensure that human rights stay enshrined within the legislation within the UK. We also need to engage with the press regulators, and we have to be highlighting issues as they arise. It's really important that we do that we are engaging on a day-to-day level when we see issues within the media, that we are contacting the media to highlight the issues. But it's also important that we're engaging at other levels as well, such as media roundtables and engaging with the press regulators. So how do we do this? How do we engage with all of these different parts of society? So we do this through awareness raising and through coming together in media roundtables and conferences and so on. This is just some information about some of the social media platforms and also websites that MEND have and that we oversee. And it highlights the need to get the information out there. Now, there's MEND, but there's also other organisations that are doing similar type things, and it's really important that we engage with media and social media that are out there to counteract some of the negativities that are out there about the Muslim community. We also have our MEND app, and we would really encourage everybody to download that. And if you want to take a minute, take your phone out and download the MEND app, because it will give you all the latest news, all the latest information on media and politics relating to the Muslim community. So it really keeps you up to date, and that's important that we stay up to date with what's going on within the media and the political sphere, so that we're able to counteract negativities, but also get on board with the good stories that are coming out and the positivities that are coming out. So it's really important that we stay up to date with all of these. So as I've said,
I just searched for it, but couldn't find the app on Android.
Oh, okay. I will share a link after this. I'll have a wee look, and I'll share a link after this, and hopefully everybody will be able to download that and get it onto their phone. Sorry about that. I will double check in a wee minute and see what's.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, great. So as you can see, MEND have a lot of conferences, although you can see the little guy in the front having a wee snooze during the conference there, but most other people are really engaged. But MEND have a lot of conferences. We have a lot of high-figure and high-profile figures there attending the conferences, which is really important. It's really important that there's a lot of engagement within the community and with wider communities to talk about Islamophobia and how we can really tackle these issues. So how do we play our part as individuals? As I've said, it's all about engagement. It's all about making sure that we're having our voices heard, whether that's individually or as part of kind of MEND community or other communities as well. So it's important that we are in our mosques are highlighting the issues that are happening and highlighting Islamophobia. Now, I know that some people think mosques, we should just go to pray and not involve with other things, but actually the mosques, is really important that we do get involved in tackling Islamophobia and making sure that our community is protected and safe. It's about engaging with women's organisations, with our schools and education. It's very important from a young age that people understand about hate and discrimination and how to tackle this and how to not grow up in a community, in a society which perpetuates hate and discrimination. The same with colleges and universities. What we've found in a lot of the groups and a lot of the webinars and a lot of the information sessions that we have been undergoing, especially in MEND, is that actually, especially in teacher training university or teacher training courses, Islamophobia and how to deal with it, the same with other discriminations, is not actually taught at the point before teachers are going into schools and are having to kind of learn on the go and things like that. So it's really important that Islamophobia is addressed in universities and colleges, and especially those who are going to be working within civic society have a good understanding of what Islamophobia is and how they can tackle it, and also how they can deal with it if it does arise, especially if they're working within schools and with our children. Again, professional networks, not just Muslim but non-Muslim organisations as well. We have IAM, so that's Islamophobia Awareness Month in November every year. And as part of that, men did a lot of engagement with different professional organisations, including Reach PLC, which is a media corporation, where we were able to deliver this training actually to the organisation. And from that, a lot of good work and a lot of good energy has come out of it, with different things within the organisation being set up in order to deal with discrimination and inequality. And again, engaging with wider community. Now, all of these things can be done as part of men, but they can also be done as an individual. If you're not comfortable joining different organisations, then that's okay. You can still do all of these things as an individual. Obviously, Muslim organisations is really important as well to be engaging with. It's important that we come together with the police to tackle Islamophobia. What we find is that often the police don't have maybe the understanding and knowledge that they could or should have about Islam and about Muslims, and therefore what the issues are when it comes to Islamophobia. I know I myself, at one point when I was suffering Islamophobic attacks, somebody had managed to get hold of my personal number, and they were trolling me online and on all different social medias. But they were doing it by sending me Quranic verses that they were manipulating and changing. And when I went to the police about it, they were very understanding and supportive, but they didn't understand about how this was Islamophobic and about how this would cause an issue. And it was only through discussion and conversation and engagement that they were able to then come to an understanding of what was actually going on and why there was an issue. So that's why it's really important that we engage with our police force across the whole of the UK at all different levels and in all different ways. Again, it's not just our MPs and our MSPs we need to be engaging with, it's our local councillors. Our local councillors are the ones on the ground who are making the decisions about our education system in our local areas and about other running and day-to-day decisions of our local community. So it's really important that we're engaging with local councillors and explaining to them the need to tackle Islamophobia and the issues that Islamophobia are causing within our communities. Again, as I highlighted, we need to make sure that our teachers are well trained in dealing with Islamophobia and other forms of discrimination, and also that our children are knowledgeable about Islamophobia and discrimination and how they can deal with it and overcome it in a really positive way. It also allows our children to grow up to be the next generation of individuals who are tackling Islamophobia, and also being the next generation who are not perpetuating Islamophobia. This is really important as well. Journalist roundtables, that's something that I talked about in the beginning. The media cannot support the Muslim community unless we're engaging with them. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the media and journalists and other people within the media world are like everybody else. They have their own contacts, their own networks, and if their contacts and networks do not include Muslims, then when a story breaks about Muslims and breaks about the Islamic world, then who are they going to turn to get the real information, to get the support, to get the knowledge and the guidance? So it's really important that we as a community are reaching out and engaging, but also the representation of Muslims within the media sphere is very small. So within Scotland, we have 1.5% of our population, but only 0.4% representation within the media world. So that's something that we need to tackle and overcome. And we need to make sure that our future generations are working within the media so that that engagement and connection is definitely there. So here's just an example of some of the roundtables and what that means. It means bringing together the Muslim community with the media community to start conversations and also overcome some of the stereotypes and also some of the myths built up around both. And what happens when we get engagement? What happens when we get engagement is that we're able to deal with issues as they arise in the media. We'll be able to have representation for different stories, different things that are coming out in the media. People are able to be there and voice what's actually going through happening within the Muslim community. So these are all areas that we need to engage with our employers, with our politicians, and with IAM, which is Islamophobia Awareness Month, which really helps to engage with all of these and the media. So as we've said, we've got employment discrimination, and these are different areas that we can really work on to help tackle Islamophobia, such as name-blind applications. Also looking at the level of Muslims within the higher levels within organisations such as management is really important, and making sure that there's equal and fair representation at all. Also making sure that the working environment is well set up to support Muslim and other communities, such as appropriate food, appropriate prayer spaces, flexible working hours for different religious holidays and during Ramadan, and also that Muslims are recognised within the workforce. Here are just some pictures that we have of political and advocacy engagement. And this here is just highlighting how to register to vote, because unless we are voting and unless we are engaging with the political sphere, then we cannot have the Muslim voice heard. So we need to engage in order to have our voices heard. So Islamophobia Awareness Month, again, is just highlighted here. And then MEND. So obviously I am the regional manager for MEND in Scotland, although it's across the whole of the UK. So MEND in Scotland has done a lot of work so far. Some of these are slightly older pictures, but we've been represented in the Scottish Parliament. We have some pictures of our working groups. And right now we have working groups in Glasgow, Edinburgh and Falkirk. And we do really encourage people to join with MEND to work to tackle Islamophobia, because we deliver training such as causes and cures. We also have other training as well, such as media and politics. And we do really support individuals to go out into the community to tackle Islamophobia. So what does successful change look like to us? So successful change is things like this. So this is newspaper corrections, and this is how on an individual level we can help tackle Islamophobia, and this is what the results are. So here we had a imam beaten to death in sex grooming town. Now, the imam who was beaten to death, may Allah forgive him, who was beaten to death, he had nothing to do with anything that was highlighted in the headline. He had nothing to do with sex grooming or anything like that. He was just simply an imam from Rochdale. After complaints were put into the paper, it was changed to imam beaten to death in Rochdale. So you can see here that they were trying to bring a negative spin on the imam, on who he was, on any involvement he'd had with anything which he hadn't had, and then it was changed to what had actually happened. The man had been beaten, the imam had been beaten to death.
Excuse me,
again here.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So looking at the before thing regarding that imam, so the headlines were derogatory and Islamophobic and promoting hatred. I mean, you mentioned that we need to engage with the media and have our presence there, but this seems just not like a uninformed headline by that journalist, but does it not seem more like deliberate attempt to spread hatred?
Well, yes, and it definitely can appear to be a deliberate attempt to spread hatred. But by engagement with the media, we can highlight this. We can highlight the deliberate attempts to spread hatred. We can highlight the fact that the negative approach that the media have towards Muslims, and actually how reporting should happen towards the Muslim community. And quite often we find that when we talk to journalists, they say, we don't know how to report. We don't know how to put this story across. And then we can support them on how to actually put stories across about the Muslim community, which aren't always negative.
But I think you're saying it in a little bit of positive light, but to me it looks like it doesn't look like that this journalists have no idea how to put this news, but I think he has an idea. He knows that it has to go this way, so that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but he sounds more like a right-wing person, But I could be wrong. But that's the feeling I get.
Well, I mean, definitely, we do have within MEND, we have our training on media. We have training on media and also politics, but on our media, and we do highlight that quite a lot of the newspapers and the print newspapers can have a very right-wing approach towards journalism, and that many journalists can have a right-wing approach towards journalism, and also that many journalists can have approach which is very sensationalising and very negative towards the Muslim community. And it is about engaging with them to try and change this rhetoric. It's about engaging with them to try and ensure that the stories that they have are not portrayed in such a negative way. It's also about putting in complaints, so not just about engagement in kind of having roundtables and things, it's about putting in complaints, so that for this one in particular, that was about putting in complaints to organisations to ensure that this headline was changed. So it's not always just about engagement, it's also about making sure that we follow the correct mechanisms to make sure that complaints are heard and highlighted, and then that we can overcome them and have the headlines changed to what they should be. Now, a lot of people think that that can be very timely and take a lot of energy, but actually it can be very quick. And also a lot of people may say, but what's the point of doing it once it's happened? It can take weeks before any changes happen. Well, one, because they do need to print a change in print media, but if it's online media, that story would always have been there, a man beaten to death in Sex Grooming Town. That story would have been there forever online. But because the change had to happen, then it was changed to a man beaten to death in Rochdale. So online, it would always be forever changed, which is obviously a good thing and what we want. So it's about making sure that we follow mechanisms to try and counteract the rhetoric which is out there from the media at this time.
Thanks.
No, that's okay, Grant. So again, we have another kind of similar story, West Bank attack on UK diplomats, and again, it's changed to be what the story actually was, which was an Israeli settler attack on UK envoys. So it's making sure that it's correct in all its ways. Another way in which we can see positive changes, such as schools. Now, this is obviously a school down south where they ban fasting and they ban hijab wearing. Obviously, banning fasting during Ramadan is very difficult for a lot of children, but actually due to positive intervention, we were able to reinstate fasting and also reinstate the ability for young girls to wear hijab if they so choose. And then this is just some headlines highlighting the positive changes that happened in the school due to engagement. But this also shows us the positivity of engagement, but also that there's still a lot of work to be done. So MEND was asked to put into the Levinson inquiry. We gave over oral representation and evidence. We were the only Muslim organisation that were able to do that. Levinson inquiry obviously highlighted that the media had to be strongly regulated. It had to have a lot more independence about it and so on. But unfortunately, the mechanism to make that happen, Section 40 has been put on ice, which means that still to this day, the independent regulator body still does not have the teeth that it should have or could have. And so therefore, our media is not regulated the way that it could be. And so therefore, it's still able to perpetuate such negativity about the Muslim community. So it's about making sure that we engage in a really positive way with politics and politicians to make sure that all of the sections and subsections of the Levinson Inquiry Royal Charter are put into place properly to make sure that we have the right and proper protections within the print media. So I highlight to everybody and I say to everybody, get involved, whether that's with MEND or another organisation or whether that's just as an individual, get involved, invest in yourself and your future and get involved in tackling Islamophobia for yourself and for future generations. here's just the link to volunteer with MEND. And I will leave you with this Quranic quote. Thank you so much for listening, and if anyone has any questions, then I am more than happy to take them.